That's what you guys are here for. And the first question that I got was, what do I do if my bench is stuck? That's a good answer. So you could add volume, meaning you do more sets, but of course that is a tricky thing, because if you're just adding garbage sets, then you won't get any better. So you should add quality sets that would, increase your bench over time. You could shorten the rest periods and basically, morning guys, increase your work capacity and your bench will get better. You could also change the exercise. So if your bench is stuck, an example would be floor presses, right? Floor presses are a great tool to really find out what you can press and what you cannot press. And then there's also questions like within exercises, like where are you stuck, right? So like in the bench press, like at the very bottom, it's your shoulder that's stuck. If it's in the middle, it's your pecs. If you can't lock out, then your tris are weak. So you can work from there and see where you're stuck. Then there's also auxiliary muscles. So like if your cuff is weak, your bench is gonna go down. If your lats are weak and you can't lock out and create tension, then your bench is also not gonna do well. And then there's the strength curve. Like are you managing all aspects of the strength curve for your pecs, your tris, your delts, right? So like, stretch position, the mid-range and the contracted. And then there is, what else did I write down? You could do a back off week. That sometimes is a solution, like just train a little bit less. And increase calories and sleep. So any of those will probably give you a nice boost. Then the next question was like, Mike, what do you think about TRX bands? Nothing. I hate to break it to you. So TRX bands were invented by a Navy guy on a ship. And you always got to consider, like, what do people need the actual equipment for? So Navy SEALs don't train for mass or for size, right? Because being big in Afghanistan is idiotic, because you got to carry your backpack, you got to chase bad guys. So if you're 250 jacked, you're also a bigger target. So Navy SEALs or like soldiers train for being, agile, quote unquote functional, and being, able to do military things. So TRX bands cater to that. What they don't do well is they don't create tension a whole lot. And they're also dangerous. Like when I see people doing push-ups on those, I'm like, oh my Lord, your cuff is gonna go. So for bodybuilder, exercise bands, especially ones made by Jump Stretch, and I'm not sponsored by them, would work much better than a TRX band. Next question, what was that? Water intake. Oh yeah, that's a good one. So like any gym you go to, everybody's carrying a gallon of water, like even in winter, right? So, you gotta drink a gallon, like, why? So water intake is driven by a few things. There's climate, needless to say, and then there's body weight. So for every 50 pounds, you should drink a liter, or as Americans say, a quart. So somebody my size should be about 4 liters a day, give or take, 4.5 maybe. Now, for instance, I have to take lithium for being bipolar. In case you haven't figured it out, I'm obviously not mentally stable. And that causes dehydration and makes you very thirsty. So that would cause me to drink more water, right? And if you perspire out and so on and so forth. But your base would be 1 quart per, that's somebody else's phone ringing, 1 quart per 50 pounds of body weight. And then of course in the summer you go higher and also. But when I see these people with their gallons, and that's usually colored, and they have like these marks, oh, I gotta finish my gallon, I like, what the heck? Best hypertrophy exercise for the quads. That's a good question. So the poo-pooed leg extension actually works really well as an isolation exercise. Like it gives you the ability to really focus on your quads, especially if you pull yourself down and just, extend the legs properly. The sissy squat, if done well, works really well as well. Or the leg press stands very low, feet rather narrow. Rest period between sets. That's a good one. So the rest period between sets, the answer is like with most fitness questions, it depends. So obviously you need to rest less between curls versus heavy squats, right? So curls you can drop all the way down to, 30, 45 seconds. Whereas for squats or like, more compound movements, you probably want to be like in the 90-second range. And it also depends on your work capacity. So because of my background is with swimming and all that sort of thing, I have a really high work capacity. So I can train very fast, meaning 40 seconds break or so, and still maintain a heavy workload. But a lot of people probably, that would be too short. So as you become a better athlete, you can basically rest less. That's the short answer. But it depends. So if your second set ends at 6 reps or 5 reps, then you didn't rest enough. It's all that simple. Then, that's a good question. So somebody wrote, oh, I have a horrible injury, I can't, this guy must be so popular, the one in locker number 7, he gets so many phone calls. So what to do if you're injured? So this guy has a spine injury, so he's not allowed to do anything. So the first thing is you got to adjust your diet. So needless to say, you're not moving as much. So the first thing that has to go is carbohydrates, right? Because carbs do 2 things, performance and recovery. But you're not performing, you also don't need to recover. So you just can eat less carbs, right? So that you can cut, especially if you're, unfortunately, let's say you're bedridden. What to do to keep muscle? Well, that is the one time when isometrics actually works. So if you can at least flex your existing muscles, you will keep them. And electrostim actually has a purpose in preventing atrophy. So remember these like ab things where people had like 6 pads and it's like, oh, train your abs while sleeping? That does not work, okay? That's horseshit. But if you're injured and let's say on your knee and you cannot do anything for the quads, and you buy a quality equipment like Comtech or so, and you place the sensors on your quads, it will at least prevent atrophy. So you're not going to lose muscle while you're recovering from the injury. So there's something to be said about that. Body recomposition is that a thing. Can you gain muscle and lose fat at the same time? You can, under certain circumstances. So if you're a beginner, obviously you can do that. If you're using steroids, you can do that, or if you come back from a long layoff or injury. The more advanced you become, it obviously gets trickier because just in the sense of physics that for fat loss you have to eat less than you burn, for muscle gain you have to eat more. So at some point you have to decide. But what I call when you're in bodybuilding kindergarten, which meaning you have just joined the gym, you can obviously do both. Speaking of bodybuilding kindergarten, hey, I've been joining the gym for 6 months, I'm not making progress, which steroid should I take? You should read a book about training and diet, okay? Several books. You have no business thinking about drugs. Drugs are for qualified people, meaning people that can actually squat twice their body weight, bench 1.5, and so on and so forth. So a beginner, not only will he do harm to his body, but also he will not maximize the steroids. So all the risk you're taking is for naught, because your training isn't optimized, your diet isn't optimized, and you haven't maxed out naturally. So steroids are like an ace up your sleeve. You can play it once. But if you use the steroids to get from I suck a lot to I suck a little bit less, that's not going to do much. Whereas if you're really, really good and then you get NFL good, that's a different story, okay? So if you're not making progress after 6 months, you're just not eating enough. That's usually the answer. So that was that. Then this question is quite interesting. What about mechanical drop sets versus regular drop sets? So a regular drop set is basically you're benching 100 pounds, you're dropping to 80, as if you can drop into 60. Whereas a mechanical drop set would be, let's say for the chest, you're doing flies and then push flies and then presses. If you watch my videos, I prefer the mechanical drop set because it's just more intelligent, if I may say so. So when you're doing a regular drop set, you're basically beating a dead horse. Like Yum, the guy number 7, man, he's awesome. So you're training, let's say, your chest, right? And what's gonna happen inevitably is that somebody who fatigues, even the lower weight, will only use the mid-range, okay? He will not do full range of motion. So you train the muscle where it's the strongest, which is better than nothing, but it's also not all that great. Whereas let's say you're doing the flies, and then you're doing the push flies where you're shortening the angle and you're recruiting a bit more tricep, and then you're doing the press where you're recruiting the delts, you are actually adding auxiliary muscles to help the target muscle to train full range of motion at all times, okay? So that way your output is just much greater. Also, the risk of injury is lower because when people do the same thing for a drop set, they tend to get sloppy, okay? That's just my experience. So I have that. Fat loss, how does it work? Okay, I mean, that's a loaded question, but so fat loss, a couple of things considered. So you have to have a calorie deficit. There's basically 2 ways to go about it. Low carb or low fat. I'm more of a low fat guy. Low carb works too. I just don't think it's optimal. How big the deficit is depends on your size, on how much you can train and so on and so forth. So it's always being said 500 calories a day, and that's a good start. But for instance, like somebody like yours truly, who is bigger and has a set point of about 4,000 calories a day, I can do 1,500 of a deficit a day and be fine. So then my rate of fat loss is bigger. Right? So that's the first thing. Then the training is the fat loss, and there's no training for fat loss. Training for fat loss and training for muscle is the same thing. So what you need to do is create maximum tension with the heaviest weight you can handle in good form. So when you're training for fat loss, the job of training is to keep the muscle. The muscle will only stay on if worked to its max capacity, because muscle is a luxury. So if you are eating less and you're not using the muscle properly, they will go away. And then you become skinny fat. Sad. Don't be that guy or girl. And then there is cardio, which cardio is not a fat loss tool per se. It's just a means to expand more calories. So you can basically, eat a little more, or like smaller athletes can create a bigger deficit. So let's say if your basic metabolic resting rate is only 1,500, and then cutting to the 1,000 is already very little. So if you can burn a little bit more with cardio, like bigger people can get lean without doing any cardio. It's not a must. Fat burners, that I can summarize very quickly. Fat burners are glorified caffeine tablets. The stuff that actually works is illegal. There you have it. How much muscle can we build? Like with everything, the law of diminishing returns kicks in, right? So in bodybuilding kindergarten, you can build anywhere between 25 pounds, even more in your first year, depending how tall you are and that sort of thing. And then you cut the number in half, meaning, do you need a locker, sir? So I have to accompany as a gym member as well. You cut the number in half. So the next year would be 12, and then 6, and so on and so forth. Females would start at 50% of that. So when males can build 25 pounds, they would be like more like 10 to 12, and then it drops down. It also drops down with age. Needless to say, so less testosterone we have, the less muscle we can build. Does my metabolism slow down at 30? It does not. Your metabolism does not have a clock. Okay, that's a little known fact. What happens is this: when we're in high school or in college, we play sports. Then we start working and we maybe play a little bit of sports, right? And then we have kids and we get promoted and we have big jobs and we don't play any more sports. And then we lose the muscle. And that's why the metabolism slows down. So, for instance, like me being old, like in my 40s, my metabolism is still pretty fast because I have more muscle than a lot of people. Or even my dad, who's in his 70s, but he pretty much never misses a workout any given day. So he can still consume a good amount of calories compared to people his age. Okay? So the metabolism slows down when we stop training, which means keep training. This is a good one, if I can find it. Hey, I'm going to my home country and I'm hey Robert, I get to this question in a second. So I'm going to my home country and I'm getting married and there's a lot of unhealthy food. Is it? Well, that is true. Food is tribal, okay? Humans are tribal. So food is one of the things how we set up the tribe, okay? So I'm like the weirdest German you'll ever meet. I don't drink beer and I don't eat sausages because I don't like it, okay? But it takes, guts to leave the tribe. So if you have a certain culture, and a lot of cultures define themselves via their food, and then you start eating different foods, you're leaving the tribe. So there's a risk reward. Like, do you want to, annoy your family for good, or how long is the phase, or like, can you convince them? So, I mean, if you're only home 1 week out of the year, like me, it doesn't really matter because that's not going to make a difference. But if you're living in a community that is maybe not so health oriented, at some point you have to draw the line and figure, are those people interested in my health, or like, do they simply not care, or how can I make this work? But it's a tricky question because you don't want to offend the people that you care for, over your physique goals. But I also feel that people should take your interest at hand and figure like, okay, this guy is eating a certain way because he has a certain goal, and that's what he wants to look like. But yeah, humans get very territorial with the food, So like I would watch soccer games and it'd be like 2:30 in the afternoon, and somebody will say, well, you're German, how come you don't drink beer? And I'm like, well, it's 2:30, I gotta go back to work, and I can't really go to the gym being shit-faced. And then they're like, oh, but you're not really a German, and then this whole debate. So often I tell them that I'm actually a recovering alcoholic, that I started bodybuilding when I was in AA, and then you get the fake sympathy. So that's one way out. Next question. Do you check in testosterone levels after 40? Yes, you should, but it doesn't really tell you all that much in all fairness. Okay, so yeah, you can check your testosterone and you're free and so on and so forth, but if the underlying question is, should I get testosterone, like, you know, TRT, the question is always like, what do you do with it, the testosterone? Some people are better responders than others, okay? I covered this in a video the other day. Bodybuilding pros or pros of all kinds handle steroids better, okay? So when they're taking, I'm making this up 200 milligrams, they're getting as much out of it as you and I taking 600, right? So your testosterone levels being low and you're being put on testosterone doesn't always equal, you know, insane amounts of muscle growth. It will get you some, but, you know, don't hope to look like Ronnie Coleman, if that answers your question. That also, the next question is, hey, I'm on testosterone from my doctor and I'm thinking of adding X, like another drug. No, do not do that. That's stupid. Testosterone is the godfather of steroids. We have libraries of research. It's another great Nazi invention, if I may say so. And we know what it does and what it doesn't do. So for recreational athletes that just want to look good at the beach, testosterone is the only thing they'll ever need. You don't need any exotic stacks where side effects are being multiplied and you're simply running a higher risk, whereas your gain is actually not all that much more, okay? So let me just decline this one really quickly. Okay, got it. So there's this belief that, oh, the pros are taking this. You're not the pros, okay? There's so many things that are different from them, genetics, work ethic, and so on and so forth. You do not compare yourself to those guys. You know, what you do, what I do is so different. So there's no need to go outside your lane. You know, stick with what we know well, and what works. What else? Rest between sets. You got this one. Alright, that's a good one. What should my volume be when training, and when do I know I did too many sets? Well, that's a good question. Sorry. Okay, Nathan, I get your question in a second. And I'm sorry, I'm just gonna clicking on this one. Okay, Corbin, I got you. Just let me answer this one, yeah? So, what was I saying? I spaced. Unbelievable. When you're trying to build, how can you assess if you're putting on appropriate proportion of muscle to fat? That's a good question. I mean, there's a DEXA you can take, but just speaking very broadly is, how do you know if you're putting on weight? When you bulk, you do not lose your top 2 abs, okay? So as a natural, if you're losing your top abs, you're gonna have such a hard time cutting down, you're gonna lose most of the gains you made, okay? So what I would say, like, and this is just a general guideline, you should start out ideally with a 6-pack. And then you bulk up, and from there on, you basically get, do you need to get it? Yeah, by all means. And then from there on, you can assess like what you're gaining and what you're not gaining. Sorry about that. So you just can't get too fat. That's the answer. Okay, frozen shoulder. I got you. So I just turned 31 a couple months ago. In April, I started dieting, and a couple months ago, I started working out. I lost around 90 pounds. What should I do to speed up my weight loss? Well, you're doing great. I mean, you lost 90 pounds, and nothing to speed up. So just keep doing what you're doing. The upper strengths, you will build strengths because you just started training. So as long as you're making progress, the only thing I would do is I would change my workout every, let's say, 4 to 5 weeks, you know, to make sure that you're not stagnating or you're not like running stale. But other than that, you're doing great. I mean, you lost 90 pounds. There's nothing to be done. So like at 6'1", you know, once you're down to I don't know, 200 pounds, 210, you can think about like bulking back up. But for the time being, just keep doing what you're doing, and you know, congrats on the weight loss. How often should you vary your workout? But that goes in the same line. I would say like every 4 to 5 weeks, because our bodies are good at like being very effective, and then the gains basically stop coming. Also, it gets boring, plain and simple. Age 51, female, broken shoulder and frozen shoulder surgery. What is the best workout to build those shoulders? That's a tough question. I mean, I don't know you, but if the shoulder is frozen, the first thing you got to work on is lower and mid trapezius. Think like reverse shrugs, we just put on like so. Lots of pull aparts, rear delt work, lots of lat work in general. And then, despite popular belief, really, really light overhead presses with dumbbells. Like even if it's a pound or 2, it doesn't matter. Like, you know, it can be a water bottle or even less, just to get some blood in there, okay? So then we have room for one more question, and then I gotta give the locker room back to people actually changing here, you know, because that's what they do. Okay, so then I'm just gonna answer the question that escaped my feeble mind beforehand, which was, how many sets should I add? And that's a loaded question, because sets is the perfect tool to make gains, but also to overtrain, okay? Because you can add unlimited sets. You can't lift unlimited weight because you're just not gonna pick it up. You also cannot do unlimited reps because it's gonna stop, but sets you can do more and more and more and more. So what's the drop-off point, right? So generally speaking, I would say about 20 sets per muscle group per week. Smaller groups can be much less, split into workouts. I train much higher, but again, I have a different work capacity to my background. So what I do does probably not work for most people. You know, so I would say if you think like back, hamstrings, quads, chest, shoulders, because there's 3D muscle, 20 sets a week. And by that I mean quality sets, not warm-up sets, but quality sets. And then the smaller stuff like the much cherished bis and tris can be less than that. That should give you you know, enough gains that you need. And then of course, like as you get better, the law of diminishing returns kicks in. You got to do more sets for less results. But I think that is a good start. And with that, I'm gonna conclude this week's Q&A. Thank you for tuning in. Sorry I was late, but we'll be back here next week, same time. In the meantime, like whatever questions you have, just post them on the site, or you know, send them on Instagram, or whatever works for you. Then I keep a log, and it makes my bipolar mind easier than if I'm prepared. Okay. So everybody, you have a great middle of the week. Thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in.